Hi everyone, Tim the Pool Man here, and welcome to clinic number 3, where we're going to talk about preventative maintenance on your pool shell and the different types of shells and stains and all kinds of things. In the first clinic, if you recall, we went over how to do proper water testing in your pool. Clinic number 2, we went through how to add chemicals to your pool. Now clinic number 3 is about the shell. So join us in just a minute and we'll go through our pool shell maintenance. Welcome back everybody to clinic number 3, proper maintenance on your pool shell. But before we get into how to maintain it, let's talk about the different types of pool shells that are out there, typically in a backyard pool. Most common that you're going to see in an in-ground pool in particular is a vinyl pool, which is typically made up of a concrete slab bottom, metal stainless steel walls with a liner that sits inside to maintain the water. That's going to be your most common, comes in many different patterns, obviously different shapes of pools. The next type is a fiberglass pool. Fiberglass pools are prefabricated. They're usually done in one pour, so they're typically a smaller pool, but really great when it comes time for a quick installation. If someone's looking for a small lap pool or something like that, that's usually where they fit in nicely, or someone with a small backyard. And then the last is a concrete pool, the most durable of them. But concrete is the actual structure part of the pool, and there are lots of different finishes that you can find. The cheapest concrete finish you're going to see is painted. You see that a lot in commercial outdoor pools. You see that quite a bit. The next type that you can see is a tile. And you can see here at our pool, it's concrete and it has a tile water line. But you can get an entire pool in concrete tile. Not as common, don't see it that much in the northern part of the world, especially here in Canada, because the pool does obviously freeze partially over the winter and you don't want that tile to pop. So you'll see it in mostly water lines in this climate. The next type is a Marbleite or a plaster finish. In that case, and you may think this is a Marbleite finish here, but it isn't. In that case, you typically will see a water line tile, like you see here, and then about 6 to 8 inches below the tile, the Marbleite would start and cover the entire pool. It's a plaster finish. The reason it's done that way is it must stay moist. And so as the water level fluctuates in the pool, that area is covered by the tile and it doesn't expose the plaster to the air. It keeps it moist. And the last type of finish is the type that you see here, which is actually it's an aggregated concrete, exposed concrete finish. So it's concrete that the aggregate inside, the rock inside, has been exposed to give it this nice, it looks like Marbleite finish, but it's actually concrete. So that's our different types of shells. Now we'll get into how to maintain them and how to keep staining from happening on them. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Now that we've talked about the different types of structured pools and finishes, we're going to talk about the potential of staining, how to avoid that in your pool. So for starters, it's very important at the beginning of the season, before you fill your pool, you should do a water test of the water that you're adding into the pool. So if it's off a well, or if it's city water, or it's being trucked in, that water should be tested ahead of time so you can have the appropriate chemicals on hand to avoid any staining. And what I'm talking in particular are metal stainings. If there are high levels of metal, copper and iron and things like that in the pool water or in your makeup water, as you're adding it into the pool, it can drop out of solution and may stain your bottom. So it's good to know ahead of time if you have a high level, then you can add a sequestrating agent. We talked about specialty chemicals in clinic number 2, where we talked about a sequestrating agent. You put it into the pool as per directed while you're filling the pool up. And what it does, it doesn't get rid of the metals, but it keeps it in solution so it doesn't drop out of solution and stain your bottom. Okay? Once the pool is full, you can add in these specialty chemicals for the staining, metal staining, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to keep the metal in solution so it doesn't drop out. If it happens that it does, let's say you forget to put some in, or you don't put it in at the beginning, or there's more metals than you expected, it can drop out of solution and it drops onto the bottom. It's typically a yellowish color, and where you'll typically find it is around your returns. If you think about it, the water's coming in, your fresh water is typically coming in through one of your returns, and in that fresh water is high level of metal, drops out of solution very quickly, and it stains around their returns. That's the most typical sign of iron content that's staining your pool, and it'll start to turn it yellow. Okay, we'll talk about in a minute how to deal with that staining, but I want to talk about the other type of staining, which is algae, and this is more common. Algae, as soon as we start adding water into the pool, we should be starting to add chlorine levels. If we keep our chlorine levels up high enough, then typically algae will not grow. We keep our circulation going, our circulation system, algae won't grow. And if we add our algicide, also algae will not grow. But let's say, we've been away for a week or two, we've neglected the pool a little bit, and we get a little bit of staining on the bottom. We'll talk about in a minute how we can remove that staining. So, told you a little bit how the stains can get here, are most common. You can also get some cloudy water or potential staining from phosphites, but we don't have a big problem with that here, so we're going to focus on the metals and algae as our two main ones. And we'll be back in just a minute to talk about how to treat it if you happen to get that stain on your bottom. Okay, just before we get into some things that we can do in order to remove stains from our pool, there's one thing I forgot to mention that's very important about keeping stains off the bottom of your pool, is keeping and maintaining good water chemistry. So we did that in our very first clinic. That's how important it is how to do the water tests, and then clinic number 2 was how to add the chemicals. If we maintain in our parameters, then especially when it comes to algae, it won't be a big problem. It's usually when we get outside of those ranges that we start to encounter issues. And once I will say that once a stain gets onto the bottom, the preventative chemicals, the algicides for the algae or the sequosol for the metals, it's a preventative product. Okay, it keeps it from happening in the first place. Once it happens, then that product is not as successful in removing it. You have to use some other means, and those other means are more of a brute strength. So what I have here is a typical pool brush. You can buy it at your local pool store, and I have it on my typical extension pole. So what I need to do is just to clip this on the end. It just clips on very simply onto the end of the pole. Once that's locked in, I can place it into the pool, twist the tightener to allow it to go up a little bit, and then I like to put it on my chin so I can tighten it back down again, make sure it's nice and tight, and then I'm at a comfortable level so I can scrub the bottom of my pool. Now, sometimes it's always a good idea, whether you have stains or not, again, to avoid the stains in the first place, is to brush your pool on a regular basis. I'd recommend every second day, grab the brush and just give it a good over. Now, the liner pools are lucky in that they're a very smooth surface. It's very hard for algae to grow on it. So usually if algae does start to grow, with some scrubbing and some chemicals we'll talk about in a minute, you can usually get it off the bottom fairly quickly. Fiberglass is the same. Because it's a smooth surface, the algae doesn't have a chance to get in all the little cracks and crevices, and it's much easier to remove. So I scrub it off by going back and forth over the stain, if there's a stain there, or over the bottom, even if there isn't a stain, right? It helps maintain and make sure no algae grows on the bottom. In the case of our pool here, which is the aggregate concrete or marblite pool, is very susceptible to algae and staining because it has a lot of cracks and crevices, which allows the algae to grab a hold better and makes it more difficult to remove. So in those cases there, it requires a bit more maintenance and a little bit harder scrubbing in order to get it off. Now, you may notice right away, in the case of algae, that as you're brushing it, the algae comes off, okay? Or parts of it come off. What you're trying to do when you're brushing it is, if we can get it to come all off, that's great. We add some chemicals, some chlorine, and we're good to go. But in all cases, it doesn't come off. But by scrubbing it, I expose the top of the algae. It weakens it so that the chlorine can do a better level, a better job on it. Okay? So as we're brushing, I'd also recommend that you use your body as much as possible. So I can use my arms and I can do this, back and forth, this way. But I find wherever I can, if I can use my body, so I like to put the pole, like for example on my shoulder, and push down on the pole and just walk back and forth with it. Okay? It's doing the same thing, but I'm not putting out as much effort when I'm brushing. Okay, push down on the pole. It's getting it down on the bottom nicely. Okay, and I can actually go back and forth over the stain or over the pool. So, if this was an algae stain that I was scrubbing, the next thing, once I've scrubbed it, like I said, if I got it all or not, now what I want to do is shock the pool. So we talked about shocking in clinic number 2, so I'll direct you back to that to see how we shock a pool. But I would use a granular shock because, like I mentioned before, it's better for staining because it's in a granular form. It takes a while to dissolve, so you can get it right over top of the stain. Again, go back to clinic number 2, and I'll tell you how to deal with that. Okay, you can use liquid, but it's important that we scrub and shock. Once that's completed, and I've removed the stain, then I can go back to using the algicide, keep my chlorine levels high, okay? But then I can go back to using the algicide as a preventative, and hopefully the stains won't appear again. You will find pools have their own characters, and you'll learn to establish, staining starts in certain areas. So maybe it's around steps, or around a curve or something, or around the return. So you keep an eye on those areas, and make sure it doesn't come back, especially in the case of algae, because once it sets in and it gets over a bigger area, it gets harder to get rid of. Okay? We'll be back in 2 minutes to talk about how to get rid of metal stains. We'll see you then. All right. We talked about algae and how to deal with algae stains. Now we're going to talk about metals, iron and copper. They usually show up as a yellow stain, and how we attempt to get rid of those. They're a little tougher. Like I said, Sequisol added in on a regular basis is a good preventative measure. But let's say it happened that it got into the pool and stained the bottom. So again, like I do with my algae, I would try to brush it off the bottom. Okay, but it's going to take a little more work in order to get it to remove. So what I may want to do in that case is take a sock and pour in granular pH into the sock. Remember, if you go back to clinic number 2, use all the safety equipment, read the instructions when you're handling the chemicals. Anyway, I would pour that granular pH down, which is really an acid in a solid form, and I would tie up that sock and I would place it down on the bottom of where that stain is. Hopefully it hasn't broadcast the stain too much over the pool, and if it's only isolated areas, that works really well. If it's the stain is a little more broadcast over the pool bottom, then you may have more success injecting acid, liquid muriatic acid, to the bottom, where it can distribute over the bottom a little bit more. So in that case, you may get some sort of cylinder where you can fill up a mixture of acid and water, take it to the bottom, and inject it right onto the stain. I know it may sound a little weird. It's hard to get rid of stains once they're on the bottom. It typically takes some direct acid of some kind to clean that up. Just be careful on your liner pool. If you're cleaning up any stains, you don't want to bleach it by putting too much chemical in it, either chlorine or acid. We can be a little more liberal when it comes to concrete, just because it can take a bit more. But yeah, do be careful when doing that, and hopefully your stains will be cleaned up. All right, join us in a minute. We'll talk about your skimmer systems and skimming your pool. Talk to you then. Hello everyone, welcome back. And next we're going to talk about skimming your pool as another important preventative to keeping your pool shell nice and clean. So I can't tell you how often to skim your pool because it's kind of a visual thing. I would say you're probably going to be doing it at least twice a day, but also it depends on how windy it is. If you have a windy day, you may be out once, or you may be out twice or 3 times in that day. It really depends. But one thing, like I said, many times your pool has different characteristics of the next pool. So a lot of times you'll get to know how the wind blows and where the dirt accumulates in your pool, and that'll tell you when you need to skim. But it is very important that you do skim. Okay? Some may say, oh, we'll let the filters pick it up. But the great thing about a skimming system, either manually like this or automated in our pool, is most dirt, when people get into the pool, or debris from your backyard, dirt and leaves and things like that, will float for some time before it sinks to the bottom. So what we want to do is we want to collect it off at the surface before it gets to the bottom, before it gets into our baskets, before it gets into the filtration system, so we don't have to do that stuff as often. Okay, so I brought out 2 different types of skimmers today. There's this one, which is called a shallow pocket skimmer. Okay, you can see it is a shallow pocket, so it's really a quick pick up a leaf here and there. So that's one type. And then we have our deep basket skimmer, which is this one, which I just broke a little while ago. But this is a deep pocket. This allows you to pick up a lot more dirt and debris. There's no real set way to skim. This is your time to relax and enjoy your pool while doing a little bit of maintenance. You know, you can have a bit of music on. If you like yoga, you can use some yoga moves. But I always like to kind of use like a pattern back and forth, a grid pattern, picking up, going this way. The flatter, I can leave the skimmer mouth, so this obviously is not going to pick up as much dirt and debris as this. So I try to keep it up and down as much as possible. But I like to do a nice slow back and forth grid pattern wherever I see the dirt or in accumulated areas. Back and forth. And you don't have to do it too fast. Again, just take your time collecting the dirt. You'll find some cases dirt and debris collects along the walls. So I find the best way to do them is you go along really close to the wall, and that moves it away from the wall. Then you turn around and come back at it the other way when it's away from the wall, and you collect the debris. So again, you go along the wall. You may not collect it here, but it pushes it away from the wall. Then I turn in and around, and as the momentum is carrying it towards me, I collect up the dirt and debris. Do that around the entire pool. And that's how you skim your pool. Be right back in a minute to talk about your skimmer baskets. Hi everyone, and welcome back. Last section we're going to talk about when it comes to our pool shell maintenance is our skimmers and skimmer baskets. I just want to talk a minute about skimmers and the importance of them, and then we'll talk about the basket. You know, there's 2 types of skimming. The first one is called infinity or an overflow gutter. This is becoming more and more popular in that it gives you easy access. It looks really nice because the water is overflowing into a trough. The downside to them is that they require a balance tank to hold that excess water, so they need a lot more maintenance room. But you see them more and more commonly. But because we have a skimmer pool, we're going to focus on cleaning the baskets and how they work. So it's very important that your water level is at the proper level for the skimmer to work properly. If it is too low, then it doesn't skim properly. It just becomes a waterfall and it doesn't skim properly. If the water level is too high, the same is true. So we want to keep our water level in the box about halfway up the box, or maybe a little bit more, but around halfway up the box. And what that does is it creates a skimming, because the water is being sucked in, it creates a skimming effect. And there's a little piece of plastic inside the skimmer, which is called a weir. And if the water level is too low, that weir sits right on the bottom and does nothing. If the water level is too high, it sits up too high and actually blocks water from coming in on the skimmer. If the water level is set right, then that weir will just float up and down, and what it creates is that skimming effect that will skim off the dirt and maintain and keep it inside the basket. So as a wave comes in, let's say if someone jumps in the pool and a wave hits this and goes into the basket, the weir will actually go up and make sure none of the dirt comes out. If we don't have that weir in there, we don't create the skimming effect, and our skimmers do not work as well as they should. So we should always make sure our skimmers are in place and that our water level is about halfway up so we get the best skimming possible. Okay, then last part, very simple. We reach in, we grab our basket. Here we have some leaves and debris in it. Right for now, for this demo purpose, I'm just going to lay it out here on the deck. I empty it out. If I have a lot of dirt and debris, I may want to take it over to a hose and spray it off. And then I put it back in. Now, how often I clean these? I would check these daily, okay? Obviously in the spring, they're going to be a lot fuller. And as the season goes on, maybe not as much, but you may get a really windy day, get a lot of debris in the pool, ends up in your skimmer, or you get a lot of people in the pool, dirt and debris ends up in there. So I would check them daily. You know, once it starts to cover 75% of the bottom, then the skimming and suction isn't working as well. So that would be the time to make sure you clean it out. So the cleaner they are, the better they're going to work. Then they just go back in, and then I lock, make sure they go to the bottom, and then I lock my lid back in. Okay? Now ideally, if we have a lot of dirt and debris in the skimmers or in the water, I would want to turn my pump off at my filtration tank, then empty the baskets, just so I don't get any of that excess debris going, bypassing when I pull it out, bypassing the basket going into my heirloom basket in the filter tank. Just avoids maintenance in there. But in this case, it wasn't really dirty, so I was able to get away with just cleaning it without turning that off. That's the lead into our next clinic. Number 4 is going to be about the filtration system. Different types of filters, cleaning your hair lint basket, different pumps, stuff like that. So I hope you join us for that. But just to finish off here, make sure you do these skimmers regularly. You may have 2 or 3. You'll find that some of them, depending on how the wind blows, are going to be dirtier than the others. And remember, we also keep our pucks and our stabilizer socks and things like that in the skimmers as well. So that concludes clinic number 3. We'll be right back with a wrap-up. Just a minute. Shoot! Welcome back, everybody. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank you for joining us for today's clinic. I hope you found it informative. I know I enjoyed doing it, and I hope you enjoyed having a chance to listen and see it. If you do have any questions or any comments about any of the information we're showing, or if you're having problems with your own pool, you can contact us at all the links that are in the description below. So yeah, please do that. We'd love to hear from you. So again, thank you for joining us from beautiful Ontario, Canada. Hope to see you on the next clinic. This is Tim the Pool Man signing out.